Right. I think we are moving on now to an overview of Act 181 of 2024. It says Act 250 up there, which is true. But in 2024, we passed Act 181, which was a large, very large, all-encompassing bill that made many changes to Act 250 and called for a couple of reports. I mentioned this yesterday. And we've asked Legislative Counsel to come in and give us some context, because we're going to be looking at the report itself later in a week, I think, or maybe next week. And in order to understand what we're looking at, it seemed like it would be helpful to go back and review the statute that asked for the report. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Ellen.
Thanks. Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. And so I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about wood products manufacturers and their treatment under Act 250. So you will recall that last year I did come in and give you all a presentation on the basics of Act 250, the state land use and development law. My PowerPoint on the quick big parts of it are on your website under my name. So if you want to flip back to that at any point, it's the basics of like how to determine if you need a permit and then what are the requirements. And so that's already up here. And so here's a few more specifics about wood products manufacturers under Act 250. So under Act 250, logging and forestry below 2,500 feet in elevation is exempt from Act 250. I think of this as a similar way that farming is treated under Act 250. So not to open any other can of worms, but under Act 250, logging and forestry is exempt under 2,500 feet, and so is farming. And so in the past, you have looked at issues with when something becomes slightly more than farming, sort of value added or other commercial aspects of a farming, that might trigger Act 250 jurisdiction. And you've worked on accessory on-farm businesses and how to treat them under Act 250. This is the corollary for logging and forestry. So the basic, the primary action of taking the logs out of the woods and processing them, that is exempt from Act 250. But then there's a second step with the value-added process that has treatment under Act 250 under these definitions of wood products manufacturers. So I have the definitions here. So we're talking about wood products and then those who use them. And so wood products manufacturer is a manufacturer that aggregates wood products from forestry operations and adds value through processing or marketing in the wood products supply chain or directly to consumers through retail sales. It includes sawmills, veneer mills, pulp mills, pellet mills, producers of firewood, wood chips, mulch, and fuel wood, log and pulp concentration yards. It does not include the facilities that purchase, market, or resell finished goods, such as furniture, pellets, milled lumber, without receiving them directly from the forestry operation. So forestry operation to a wood products manufacturer, that's what we're talking about, but not the next step of like the retail person who hasn't been actually doing the value adding themselves. And wood products includes logs, pulpwood, veneer wood, boltwood, wood chips, stud wood, poles, pilings, biomass, fuel wood, maple sap, and bark. So those definitions are used in Act 250, and there's been a few of these changes to Act 250 related to these things in the last few years. So in 2017, you added this provision for small sawmills. So when one of these facilities applies for Act 250 permit, it will be treated as a minor application. So a minor application under Act 250 has a much faster timeline to get their permit processed. And this is for a sawmill that produces 3.5 million board feet per year or annually or less, or an operation that involves primary processing of forest products of commercial value that annually produces 3,500 cords or less of firewood or cordwood, or 10,000 tons or less of bullwood, whole tree chips, or wood pellets. So this is for just these types of facilities. They go through the minor application process by default, and it's a much quicker turnaround than a major application would get.
I remember having you in, I think, 2 years ago, maybe when we were looking at this and having a conversation about Bullwood. And I think Representative Lipsky was able to enlighten us a little bit, because it's not a term that we normally use.
Yeah, I was lost.
Yeah.
I actually don't remember what that is.
Well, I think it was 2 years ago, so
Okay.
yeah.
Small diameter, short wood that often were used for manufacturers. Like a little flag that has a wooden finial on the end. It might be this long.
Okay,
We had all sorts of tongue depressors. It's made out of all wood, white birch typically. Toothpick might come out of all wood.
Great. So then another change that you all made in 2022, this provision was added specifically to give specific permit conditions for wood products manufacturers. So first, when issuing a permit, so when a district commission issues a permit, they almost always attach some basic conditions, and those conditions are attached to address some of the criteria under Act 250. So to address or mitigate issues that may come up with the facility. And so first it says that the district commission shall account for the seasonal, weather dependent, land dependent, and varied conditions unique to this industry. So asking them to recognize that this is often a very seasonal industry that depends on the weather and getting trees out of the forest. Subsection B adds that a permit condition that sets hours of operation for a wood products manufacturer shall only be imposed to mitigate an impact under criteria 1, which is air pollution and noise, 5, which is traffic, or 8, which is aesthetics, which also includes noise. And so those are generally the criteria that you set hours of operation to address anyways. So for some businesses, it's pretty typical for there to be a condition that says you have to operate within standard hours of operation because your facility is quite noisy and you have neighbors and they would like that to be quiet at night. So that's really typical, but it goes on to say, if an adverse impact would result, a permit with condition shall allow the manufacturer to operate while allowing for flexible timing of deliveries of wood products from forestry operations to the manufacturer outside of permitted hours of operation, including nights, weekends, and holidays, for the number of days demonstrated by the manufacturer as necessary to enable deliveries not to exceed 90 days per year. So going through this process, the manufacturer can say to the district commission, we need to have deliveries outside of normal business hours, including nights, weekends, and holidays, because it really is weather and seasonally dependent for us to get these forestry products so that we can then use them in our business. So up to 90 days per year, they can request that they operate outside of standard business hours.
And deliveries here, or maybe this is obvious, but it's referring to incoming raw materials.
Yeah. Yep. But then C also, it touches on a different issue with fuel. So there's also this permit conditions for delivery on wood heat fuels. So a permit with conditions issued to a wood product manufacturer that produces wood chips, pellets, cordwood, or other fuel wood used for heat shall allow for flexible delivery of that fuel from the manufacturer to the end user outside of permitted hours of operations, including nights, weekends, and holidays from October 1st to April 30th of each year. Permits with conditions shall mitigate the undue adverse impact while enabling deliveries by the manufacturer. So again, these businesses produce products that are used to heat homes. And so this, again, recognizes that they can have their permits can allow them to deliver outside of normal business hours on nights, weekends, and holidays from October 1 to April 30th of each year.
And we're talking here about, just a reminder, Act 250 permits. This is
Yes.
local.
Correct.
This is Act 250 permits. Okay. Representative O'Brien.
Yeah, just along those lines. Can you just give us a quick tutorial on the district commissions are under the Land Use Review Board, or they're an agency of natural resources, and then environmental courts, which came up yesterday.
So
Just how this sort of works in state government.
Sure. So Act 250 is the state land use and development law. It is the agency that administers it is called the Land Use Review Board. It's a slightly unusual system compared to other permitting systems where they have oversight and administration and create rules. But below them are the district commissions. There's 9 of them. They largely correlate to the different counties in the state. Those are made up of 3 members, basically volunteer members from each community where that district is located. So we're in Montpelier right now, we're in Washington County, we're in District 5 of Act 250. So Montpelier and the surrounding towns have a district commission that's made up of people who live nearby. And they are not controlled by the LURB. They review when someone wants to build something in District 5, they submit an application, it is reviewed by the district commission, and they either do a minor permit where it takes 14 or so days to issue the permit, or they do a major permit, and they hold a hearing on it. When they issue that permit, the LURB has no say. Right now, they're just an administrative body. If someone would like to challenge that permit appeal goes to the environmental court from the district commission. So the Agency of Natural Resources is not involved at all, unless the Agency of Natural Resources thinks there's an environmental issue that they are going to weigh in on.
So in this case, the chair was introducing us yesterday too about this whole farming and RAPS thing at the Supreme Court level came up through the environmental court side of things. So same thing here, that if a municipality did not, wanted to somehow oppose one of these permits, it would end up in environmental court.
Potentially, yes. I mean, a municipality can participate in an Act 250 proceeding. They don't often do that because there is also the municipal zoning system that is its own system. So Act 250 is the state land use law, but individual towns that have adopted zoning have a municipal land use system that they issue permits for. So everything I've been talking about is just Act 250. The towns themselves have their own sets of regulations through their zoning that would apply potentially to these facilities.
And then the individual Vermonters, if they sued, say, a sawmill because they didn't like traffic, that would end up in environmental.
Yes.
Those two.
Yep. Yeah. And then finally on this slide, just to wrap up this little part, typically under Act 250, when a permit is issued with conditions, the permit holder can't just ask for those conditions to be changed. However, the language in the statute included this special provision that says, in recognition that you changed and established these specific permit conditions for wood products manufacturers, it waives the requirement to go through Act 250 Rule 34E, which is the rule that sets the procedure for changing conditions. So when this was adopted in 2022, wood products manufacturers that were already existed could just bypass Rule 34E and just ask that the board to update their permit to reflect these default conditions. So that was a little shortcut you also gave them for that.
You did say the date, we can't see it on the.
It's 2022.
2022, okay.
Yes, sorry. Okay, and then coming up to what you did in Act 181. So in Act 181, which was in 2024, you created this provision for Primag soil mitigation. So I haven't talked to you about Primag soil mitigation this year, but I've been in here a few times on it. Under Act 250, one of the criteria is to demonstrate whether or not the construction would damage primary agricultural soils on the site. If so, there is a formula in statute for how there's a requirement that you mitigate the harm to those primary agricultural soils, either by conserving other soils elsewhere or paying a mitigation fee so that VHCB can purchase comparable soils elsewhere to be conserved. And so there's a formula in statute that requires more land with primag soils to be conserved than those are being destroyed. And so it generally results in a ratio between 2 to 1 to 3 to 1, depending on where the soils are located and what number on the prime scale they are. This provision set that for wood product manufacturers, if they are going to be causing damage to prime ag soils, the mitigation ratio is 1 to 1. So it lowers the fee that wood products manufacturers would need to pay, but still requires them to do some conservation. And then the other thing in Act 181 was this requirement for the report that you're going to hear. So Section 35 of Act 181 added this provision. So the Land Use Review Board, in consultation with the Department of Forest, Parks, and Recreation, shall convene a stakeholder group to report on how to address the Act 250 permitting process to better support wood products manufacturers and their role in the forest economy. The group shall examine the Act 250 permitting process and identify how the minor permit process that I showed you in 6084G has been working and whether there are shortcomings or challenges. The group may look at permitting holistically to understand the role of permits from the Agency of Natural Resources, which may have their own permits that could apply, municipal permits like zoning permits, where they apply, and Act 250 permits, and develop recommendations to find efficiencies in the entire process or recommend an alternative permitting process for wood products manufacturers. And that report was due December of 2014, but I don't think they were a little bit late with it. So it has been released, but
December of 2024.
yes. But I don't think it came out until this summer. And they were quite busy with all the changes that had been happening.
We were kept up to date last year. There was a couple of delays, and I, at one point, had hoped that we would have the report and be able to look at it last year. It came out in June, I think. So, and it's should be on our page. And a good time to plug. It'd be, I think, very helpful if all of us took the opportunity when we're not in the room here to just look at that report ahead of time before we get the presentation. That would be a good idea. It's more than a page. You'll need to set aside a little bit of time to look at it, but won't go on and on forever. Do you have anything else?
That's it.
Ellen? Okay. Questions? John?
Our wood product manufacturers, do they come under the 3-acre rule for
I
impervious?
don't know. That's because that's an A&R water rule, so I don't work on that. Yeah.
I have known no relief from the 3-acre.
No relief.
I'm not aware of any relief. We've had testimony in here by LSF, Forest Products out of Fletcher, Vermont. Cost them a lot of money and time. And if it wasn't for, he had known the costs he allowed that particular producer, he never would have started, you know.
But interesting that
So
a permit for that would have to go through A&R.
Yeah,
Totally
so-
not one of these.
Yeah.
Permits.
The language in the language in 181 there, requesting the report, and called for a review not just of the Act 250 permitting process, but more holistically, right?
Yeah.
So A&R reports, or A&R permitting, but also municipal permitting theoretically. And so these are two different topics really. But yesterday when we were looking at the Supreme Court ruling on municipal regulation of ag, we saw the statute, and you may have noticed that that's part A, and then part B of the statute is municipalities also can't regulate forestry operations, and C is silviculture.
Yeah.
But wood products manufacturers are neither of those things. So it's possible for towns also to be involved in permitting for sawmills or ship manufacturers.
Alan, because we're not running low on time. I think it was your second slide
Oh, sure.
where you define sawmill is, small sawmills want to produce
Mhm.
3.5 million board feet annually, or cordwood producers who, I just would like to see that.
Sure. Yeah, so
Some
that,
thoughts. Yeah,
right, so this is a specific, and I'm not saying that that term is used it's not used anywhere else in statute that these are small, but this was in 2017, looking for what were small operations that could go through a faster Act 250 process.
so let's say there are 2,000 or 5,000 firewood producers in Vermont. Most of them are between 10 cords and 100 cords. There are a few that do over 3,000, maybe two. Some that do most do way less than 3,500. So there's a big difference between a homeowner or an extended family or who make firewood with a small splitter, sell it to their neighbor. All of those. I mean, this is to get to your municipal law, bylaws. It's very easy for a neighbor to say, you know, I can't stand the sound of that chainsaw in the morning, and they could be subject, not just under the short review, Act 250, but could also be impacted by a municipal noise ordinance or types of operation. By the way, there are tens of thousands of Vermonters, typically moderate to lower income, that rely on cordwood for heat. So some of these, to invest in a firewood processor, now it's wouldn't some $150,000, some are 90,000, some are 50,000. Invest in that, take a little tenth of an acre where you operate it on. The risk of being shut down, Act 250 doesn't sound like it's a big deal, but that law that we heard testimony on the RAPs, you're very vulnerable to a disgruntled neighbor or a town that's has some, very repressive leadership. It's just an observation that Act 250 isn't the only devil in the room, or the only potential threats wood producers.
So if while you've got it back up again, then if you would could you just go to the Act 181 which they're calling for the report. Shall convene a stakeholder group to report on how to address permitting process. The group shall examine Act 250 permitting and identify how the minor permitting process has been working. You may look at permitting holistically to understand the role of permits from A&R, municipal permits, C here, and Act 250 permits, and develop recommendations. This came out of those of us who were on the committee 2 years ago or on an adjacent committee will perhaps remember that we spent some time looking at ways to provide some relief to wood products manufacturers for the Act 250 process, and this was what came out of that.
Remember?
Yeah. So again, I would say everybody take a look at that report when you have a chance, and then we'll be hearing quite a bit more about it from LURB, from the Land Use Review Board initially, and then we'll be hearing from other stakeholders too.
Just, for the record, I recall the Rural Caucus delivered testimony to exempt these three small categories And I believe maybe went to the Environment Committee and that exemption was not, there was no buy-in by them. But this language is what came out of the Environment Committee and into what ultimately was Act 181,
Yeah.
Which we're still trying to get a handle on.
While we have Ellen here, any questions, any other questions related to this topic? Representative O'Brien.
Comment, so a new sawmill being built into town, it looks like you might potentially need permits from all three of those groups, right?
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
Good. I don't think this was a question for Ellen, but I want to, when we pick this topic up again, curious to know about this, who's actually qualifying for the minor permit process. So Jed, you seem to be suggesting that most firewood manufacturers were under that 3,500.
I wouldn't say 100% of them, but I'd say 90.
Yeah.
95%.
And I'm wondering about mills, how, whether it's a different number, 4 feet.
Just again, historically, going back 45 years, someone who produced 3 million feet a year was a pretty good sized sawmill. They likely had a circular blade and there was a lot of flow of logs, all very local. Back when there were dozens in every county or hundreds of mills. Now we're down to under 20 mills statewide. We've lost 98% of our manufacturing capacity. So those that remain are producing many of them over this. So that's the reality. That segment is here.
Just one more quick one. What was your slide? In the beginning, it was defining.
These are the definitions that are used in these other provisions. It's not, though, those defined items are not part of G.
Right.
Yeah.
But the slide before that.
Yeah, so
There. So we're always interested in this committee because we have jurisdiction about, but maple sap, do you get to pick if you're say, Representative Burt and you have 25,000 taps at some point? This is a wood product operation.
I think it's farming.
The
That part isn't though.
The sap is a forest product.
Right.
The syrup is an agricultural.
So permitting, I'm just wondering,
You
know,
need
where
an
that
Act
falls.
250 permit to
Yeah.
put up a shed with a vacuum pump to draw a remote sugar bush?
yeah, I don't know.
Not necessarily. So not.
Put a sugar house to boil.
So we've asked a question here. Let's let council answer.
Oh, I think I've had this conversation with you all multiple times. I think it's come up and I think Rep Lipsky to just explain. So yes, maple sap falls under wood product. But there is a definition of farming and it does include syrup. So just harvesting sap and turning it into syrup is considered farming. And so that is generally exempt from Act 250. However, if once you start to get into further value added using that syrup in making a beverage or something, you're starting to get into the accessory on farm business realm. And I don't know if anyone is using maple sap and having it not be considered an agricultural product. I don't know if there's someone not going down that route and then they would fall under this definition. I don't know.
There are certainly lots of people who collect sap and sell it to somebody who does make it into maple syrup. So if you don't go the whole route to maple syrup, are you essentially in the forest world?
Oh, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Representative Bartholomew.
mentioned accessory non-farm businesses for other products. What about taking it beyond syrup, like candy and sugaring?
Yeah.
Is that still the same farming? Same product? It's
Just
just,
in that,
well, and
it's
so.
still agriculture?
Yes, we've had this conversation too, because if the sap you are using to make value-added products like candy or something is primarily from your own farm, that then still the processing and preparation of that into a product falls under farming. But the farther away, or if you're from your farm, or if you're taking in other people's sap, then that's when it starts to enter the accessory on-farm business realm. But last year you did pass something to address that, but is escape. You did make some amendments to that to further extend it. So yes, we've talked about this.
And we will probably talk about it.
Yeah.
Next time you're in on that. Okay, good. Thank you very much. We will continue wood products manufacturers later in the week. And now we're going to take a little break. We will be here promptly